The memorial hall was quiet and dark. Old soldiers sat in the shadows, their bodies broken by time and war. Some had missing limbs. Some had scars that would never heal. They came here every night to sit together, to remember, and to drink in silence. Oran was the oldest of them all. His carapace, once bright blue and strong as steel, had faded to a dull. 2 of his 4 arms were gone, lost on a frozen battlefield 40 years ago. His mandibles were torn, making it hard for him to speak clearly. But his eyes were still sharp. His memory was still perfect. That was the curse of surviving a war. The body forgot how to fight, but the mind never forgot what it had seen. A young female entered the hall. Her name was, and she worked for the Historical Preservation Society. She was barely 30 years old. She had never known war. To her generation, humans were trading partners and tourists. They were the strange, soft creatures who smiled too much and talked too loud. They were friendly. They were harmless. Oran watched her approach his table. She was nervous. Good. She should be nervous, not because of him, but because of what he was about to tell her. "Strike Commander Oran," she asked. "Thank you for agreeing to speak with me." He gestured for her to sit. Around them, the other veterans watched. Some of them had also fought humans. They knew what memories this conversation would bring back. They stayed close, offering silent support. "You want to know about the war," Oran said. His voice was rough, damaged by an old throat wound. "You want to record my stories for your archives." "Yes, Commander. The young generation does not know what happened. The schools teach only dates and numbers. They do not teach the truth." "No," Oran agreed. "They do not, because the truth is difficult to believe." Placed her recording device on the table. "Then please, Commander, help me understand. Help everyone understand." Oran was silent for a long moment. He looked at the memorial wall behind him, covered with thousands of names. Friends, brothers, soldiers who had trusted him to lead them. Soldiers who had died screaming on alien worlds, fighting an enemy they had badly underestimated. "Do you know what humans look like?" he finally asked. Nodded. "Of course. They have 2 arms, 2 legs. They have soft skin with no natural armor. They have flat faces and small teeth. They are not physically impressive." "No, they are not," Oran said. "When we first encountered them, we thought they were prey animals. They had no claws, no venom, no natural weapons of any kind. Their bodies were slow and weak compared to ours. Our scientists studied them and laughed. They said humans were barely more dangerous than grass eaters." He leaned forward, and his damaged mandibles clicked together. "Our scientists were fools." Shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "The war lasted 22 years, she said. "We lost over 8 million soldiers. I have read the numbers, but I do not understand how. Our military was larger. Our technology was better. Our soldiers were stronger." "Yes," Oran said, "all of that was true, and none of it mattered." He picked up his drink with his remaining hand. The liquid was strong, meant to dull pain and quiet memories. He had been drinking it every night for 40 years. "You think you know what humans are," he said. "You have seen them in your cities. You have watched them laugh and play with their children. You have traded with them. You think they are friendly because they smile at you." He took a long drink. "I am going to tell you what they become when you give them a reason to stop smiling." Leaned forward, her recording device capturing every word. "My first battle against humans was on a world called New Tasmania," Oran began. "It was a small colony, only 50,000 humans, farmers mostly, families who had left their home world to build a new life on the frontier. High Command said it would be an easy victory. They said the colonists would surrender within days. They said humans were cowards who valued their lives above all else." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "We landed 200 elite warriors, the best soldiers in the hegemony. We had air support, heavy weapons, and complete control of the space above the planet. The humans had farming tools and hunting rifles." "And they surrendered?" asked. No, Oran said quietly. They did not surrender, they disappeared. He described the first hours after landing. The forces had moved toward the main settlement, expecting to find terrified civilians waving white flags. Instead, they found empty buildings, empty streets, food still cooking on stoves, toys abandoned in yards. The humans had simply vanished into the vast forests that covered most of the planet. We searched for them, Oran continued. We used heat sensors and motion trackers. We flew aircraft over the forest canopy. We found nothing. It was like they had become ghosts. Perhaps they were hiding, suggested, waiting for rescue. Oran shook his head slowly. They were not hiding, they were hunting. The first soldier disappeared on the second night, a young warrior named who had stepped away from the camp to relieve himself. They found his body the next morning, half a kilometer away. His throat had been cut. His weapon and supplies were gone. There was no sign of his killer. We thought it was one human, Oran said. A lone fighter who had gotten lucky. We increased our patrols. We set up sensor networks. We were careful. He paused, his eyes distant. The next night we lost 3 more soldiers. The night after that, 5. By the end of the first week, we had lost 20 warriors and we had not seen a single human. Was writing notes quickly, her hand trembling slightly. How is that possible? Your soldiers were trained. Your equipment was advanced. The humans knew their land, Oran explained. They knew every tree, every stream, every cave. They moved through the forest like water through sand, and they were patient, so incredibly patient. They would wait for hours, for days, for the perfect moment to strike. They did not fight like soldiers, they fought like predators. He told her about the traps, simple things made from wood and rope and sharp metal, pits covered with leaves that would break a soldier's leg, wires stretched across paths that would cut through armor joints, poison smeared on thorns that lined certain trails. They did not try to kill us quickly, Oran said. They wanted us to suffer. They wanted us to be afraid. A wounded soldier required 2 healthy soldiers to carry him. A frightened soldier made mistakes. The humans understood this. They used our own compassion against us. Looked up from her notes. That sounds cruel. It was, Oran agreed. But we had invaded their home. We had come to take their world. Their families were hiding in caves, their children crying from hunger and fear. They did what they had to do to protect their people. He finished his drink and set the empty glass on the table. That was the first lesson the humans taught us. They did not fight with honor. They did not follow rules. They did not care about glory or tradition. They cared only about one thing, survival, and they were willing to do anything, suffer anything, sacrifice anything to survive. Was silent for a long moment. Finally, she asked, "What happened on New Tasmania? How did the battle end?" Oran looked at the memorial wall again. So many names from that single campaign. We landed 200 soldiers, he said. After 5 months of fighting, 41 of us escaped. We did not win. We did not conquer. We ran away from a bunch of farmers with hunting rifles. He turned back to face her, and in his ancient eyes, she saw something that made her blood run cold. Fear. After 40 years, the old warrior was still afraid. And that, he said softly, was only the beginning. Oran poured himself another drink. The other veterans in the memorial hall had moved closer, their own memories stirring. Some of them had fought on New Tasmania too. They remembered. "Tell me more about the forest," said. Her voice was quieter now, more careful. "Tell me what happened after the first week." Oran closed his eyes. When he spoke again, his voice was distant, like he was speaking from somewhere far away. By the second week, we had stopped sleeping. Every sound in the darkness made us jump. Every shadow looked like a human. Our soldiers were exhausted and terrified. Some of them started shooting at nothing, wasting ammunition on trees and bushes. He described how the humans had changed their tactics. The early attacks had been quick and silent, but once the soldiers were tired and scared, the humans became cruel. They started leaving messages, Oran said. Bodies of our soldiers, arranged in terrible ways. Sometimes they would hang them from trees where we could see them from camp. Sometimes they would leave pieces near our food supplies. Felt sick, but she kept recording. This was history. This needed to be remembered. We tried to hunt them, Oran continued. We sent out squads to search the forest. Most of them never came back. The ones who did were changed. They had seen things. They had heard things. One soldier came back alone after his entire squad was killed. He never spoke again. He just sat and stared at nothing until he died 3 years later. The humans used sound as a weapon. They would make noises in the darkness, strange sounds that echoed through the trees. Sometimes it was screaming. Sometimes it was laughter. Sometimes it was nothing but silence, which was somehow worse. They wanted us to know they were there, Oran explained. They wanted us to know they were watching. They were always watching. Look down at her notes. You mentioned someone called the grandmother. Who was she? A strange sound came from Oran's throat. It took a moment to realize he was laughing, but it was not a happy laugh. It was the laugh of someone remembering a nightmare. The grandmother, he repeated. That was what we called her. We never learned her real name. She was an old human female, 63 years old. In human terms, that is elderly. Her body was weak and slow. She should have been no threat to our warriors. He paused, gathering his thoughts. She killed 19 of my soldiers. 19 trained warriors armed with advanced weapons wearing combat armor. She killed them with a farming tool, a thing called a machete, a simple blade used for cutting plants. Could not understand. How could an old female with a farming tool kill 19 soldiers? Because she knew the forest, Oran said. She had lived there for 30 years. She knew every path, every hiding spot, every stream. She moved through the trees like she was part of them, and she never stopped hunting us. He described her methods. She would find a soldier who had wandered too far from the group. She would follow him for hours, staying just out of sight. She would wait until he relaxed, until he felt safe. Then she would strike from behind, silent and fast, and disappear into the trees before anyone could respond. We set traps for her. We used bait. We had 50 soldiers hunting her at one point. She killed 3 of them and escaped every time. Did you ever catch her? Asked. No, she died of natural causes 2 years after the war ended. Old age. She lived long enough to see her world freed. She lived long enough to watch us leave in shame. Oran shook his head slowly. A 63-year-old grandmother. She should have been sitting with her, telling stories. Instead, she became a legend, a monster that our soldiers whispered about in the darkness. He told about other humans who had fought on New Tasmania. There was a teacher who had organized the children into messenger runners, carrying information between hidden camps. There was a doctor who had performed surgery in caves, saving lives with stolen medical supplies. There was a farmer who had figured out how to make explosives from fertilizer and destroyed an entire supply convoy. None of them were soldiers, Oran said. They were ordinary people, teachers, doctors, farmers, parents. But when we threatened their families, they became warriors. It was like a switch had been flipped inside them. He described the moment he truly understood what humans were. It was late in the campaign, when the forces had finally cornered a group of human fighters in a valley. There were only 12 of them left, surrounded by over 100 soldiers. They had almost no ammunition. They had no way to escape. We called for their surrender, Oran said. We told them they would be treated fairly. We told them the fighting could end. All they had to do was put down their weapons. Did they surrender? Asked, though she already knew the answer. No, they charged us. 12 exhausted humans with empty rifles charging 100 armored soldiers. They knew they would die. They did not care. They fought with their hands, with rocks, with broken pieces of their own weapons. They fought until every single one of them was dead. Oran's voice dropped to a whisper. That was when I understood. Humans do not have a surrender instinct. Other species, when they are beaten, they give up. They accept defeat. They try to survive. But humans are different. Something in their biology, something in their minds refuses to quit. They will fight until they cannot move. They will keep fighting after they should be dead. They do not know how to stop. He looked at with his ancient eyes. Do you understand how terrifying that is? To fight an enemy who will never surrender, who will never stop, who will keep coming no matter how many you kill. Did not answer. She was starting to understand. The worst part was the wounded, Oran continued. When a soldier is badly hurt, he accepts death. He knows his time has come. But humans refuse to die. We shot them and they kept crawling toward us. We cut them and they kept fighting. I saw a human with both legs destroyed pull himself across the ground to grab a fallen weapon. He killed 2 of my soldiers before we could stop him. He was quiet for a moment, lost in memory. We started calling New Tasmania the Forest of Ghosts, because that is what it felt like. We were being haunted. We were being hunted by ghosts who knew no fear, felt no pain, and never, ever stopped. Finally, after 5 months of fighting, the retreat order came. High Command had realized that New Tasmania could not be taken quickly or easily. The cost was too high. The soldiers were too broken. We left in the middle of the night, Oran said. We did not announce our retreat. We did not negotiate. We just ran. 41 survivors out of 200. And as our ships lifted off, I looked down at the forest below. He paused, his damaged mandibles clicking softly. They were standing at the edge of the trees, hundreds of them, the humans who had been hiding, who had been hunting us for 5 months. They stood in silence and watched us leave. No cheering, no celebration, just silence. They were probably relieved, suggested, happy that the fighting was over. Oran shook his head. No, I saw their faces. They were not relieved, they were not happy. They were angry. They were angry that we were leaving before they could finish killing us. He drained his glass again. That was when I knew. The war was not going to end quickly. These humans were not going to forget. They were not going to forgive. We had come to their world and killed their families. We had turned farmers into warriors and grandmothers into killers. He looked at, and his voice was heavy with old guilt. We had made them hate us, and human hatred, I would learn, is the most dangerous thing in the galaxy. Refilled Oran's glass. Around them, the memorial hall had grown quieter. Some of the other veterans had drifted away, unable to listen anymore. The memories were too painful. After New Tasmania, Oran said, I requested a transfer to the space fleet. I thought that fighting in space would be different. There would be no forests for humans to hide in, no mountains or caves or rivers, just ships and stations and the cold emptiness of the void. He laughed bitterly. I was a fool. The Battle of Station was one of the longest and bloodiest engagements of the war. Was a massive human space station that controlled a critical jump point. Whoever held could control the movement of ships through an entire sector. The hegemony needed that station. We arrived with 200 warships, Oran said. Station had a population of 40,000 humans, both military and civilian. They had 12 small defense ships and a few hundred soldiers. Our commanders said the siege would last 2 weeks at most. How long did it actually last? Asked. 11 months. Stared at him in disbelief. 11 months, with 200 ships against one station. You still do not understand humans, Oran said. Numbers mean nothing to them. Odds mean nothing. They do not calculate their chances of winning. They simply refuse to lose. He described the early days of the siege. The fleet surrounded the station and cut off all supply lines. No food could get in, no fuel, no ammunition. Standard doctrine said that the humans would surrender within weeks once their supplies ran out. Instead, the humans rationed. Every piece of food was divided and measured. Every drop of water was recycled. They took apart non-essential parts of the station and used the materials to repair essential systems. They shut down entire sections to save power. They ate one meal every 2 days, Oran said. Children got the most food, then the workers, then the soldiers. The leaders ate last and least. No one complained. No one demanded special treatment. They shared their suffering equally. Was writing quickly. That is impressive discipline. It was more than discipline, Oran replied. It was something deeper, a unity that we did not understand. They were not just fighting for survival. They were fighting for each other. Every human on that station would rather die than let their neighbors down. As the months passed, the situation grew desperate. The commanders expected surrender at any moment. Instead, the humans found new ways to resist. They sent children out in escape pods as decoys, drawing ships away from the real supply runners. The supply runners were volunteers who knew they would probably die. They flew tiny ships through the blockade, carrying just enough food and medicine to keep the station alive for another week. I commanded one of the ships that intercepted these runners, Oran said. They never surrendered. Even when their ships were crippled and burning, they would aim for our vessels and try to ram us. They turned their own deaths into weapons. When the food began to run out completely, the humans made a terrible decision. They asked for volunteers to go into cryogenic sleep, a frozen state where they would not need food or water. Hundreds volunteered, knowing they might never wake up. And when the cryogenic pods were full, Oran continued, his voice dropping, they asked for different volunteers, old humans, sick humans, those who were already dying. They volunteered to end their lives early so their food rations could go to the young and healthy. Stopped writing. They killed themselves to save food. They chose to die so others could live. Parents, grandparents, people with months or years of life left. They made the choice calmly without being forced. Some of them held parties the night before, celebrating their lives with their families. Then they walked into the medical bay and never walked out. Oran was quiet for a moment. We intercepted a transmission during this time. A human mother was sending a message to her child who had escaped on one of the early evacuation ships. She told him she was proud of him. She told him she loved him. She told him that the stars would remember their names. His voice cracked slightly. She was eating one meal every 3 days at that point. She was slowly starving to death. But she did not ask to be rescued. She did not beg for help. She only wanted her child to know that she loved him. The breaking point came in the 8th month. The commanders, frustrated by the endless siege, decided to assault the station directly. They would board it and take it by force. That was our mistake, Oran said. The humans were waiting for us. The assault began with 5,000 soldiers boarding the station from multiple points. They expected to find weak, starving defenders who would fall quickly. Instead, they found traps, barricades, ambush points in every corridor. The humans had spent months preparing for this moment. They knew their station perfectly, every vent and maintenance tunnel and hidden space. We lost 600 soldiers in the first hour, Oran said. The humans fought like demons. They had almost no ammunition left, so they fought with knives and tools in their bare hands. I watched a human woman, so thin I could see her bones through her skin, kill 3 of our soldiers with a piece of broken pipe. But the worst was yet to come. While we were fighting inside the station, the humans launched their counterattack. They had been building something in secret for months. Civilian shuttles, modified into suicide rams, filled with explosives made from chemicals they had stolen from our supply ships. The attack was led by the station commander himself, a human named Victor. He was 60 years old and had not eaten in 4 days. He could barely stand, but he climbed into the lead shuttle and flew it directly at the command ship. We destroyed his shuttle before it hit, Oran said, but he had shown his people the way. 17 more shuttles followed. 18 of our warships were destroyed. Thousands of our sailors died. Looked up 18 warships from suicide attacks. They traded their lives for our ships, Oran confirmed. And they considered it a fair trade. Every human who flew those shuttles volunteered. They wrote letters to their families, said their goodbyes, and flew into death without hesitation. The station finally fell after 11 months. When forces finished clearing the last defenders, they found something that haunted Oran for years afterward. The humans had destroyed everything useful, every computer, every piece of data, every weapon and tool and resource. They had spent their final hours making sure we would gain nothing from our victory. And the survivors asked. There were less than 1,000 left alive. Most of them were children who had been hidden in the deepest parts of the station. The adults had fought to the last. Oran stood slowly and walked to the memorial wall. He placed his remaining hand on a section covered with names. Before they died, the humans wrote messages on the walls, in their own blood because they had no paint left. They wrote the names of their dead. They wrote promises that their children would remember, and they wrote warnings to us. "What kind of warnings?" asked softly. Oran turned back to face her. In the dim light, his face looked ancient and tired. They promised that for every human we killed, 10 more would rise to take their place. They promised that they would never forget what we did. They promised that their vengeance would follow us across the stars. He returned to his seat slowly. We won the Battle of Station. We took the jump point. Our commanders called it a great victory. He picked up his glass but did not drink. We lost 18 warships, 8,000 soldiers, and 11 months of time. We captured a ruined station and 1,000 orphaned children. And we made 40,000 martyrs whose names would be remembered by every human in the galaxy. He finally took a drink. "Tell me, young one, does that sound like a victory to you?" The night had grown late. Outside the memorial hall, the moons of Prime had risen, casting pale light through the windows. His recording device had been running for hours, capturing every word of Oran's testimony. "I have a question," said carefully, "something I have always wondered about the war." "Ask," Oran replied. "If humans were so terrifying, so impossible to defeat, why did the hegemony keep fighting? After New Tasmania, after Station, why did we not simply make peace?" Oran made a sound that might have been a sigh. "That is the question, is it not? The question that haunted our commanders for 22 years. He leaned back in his chair, his damaged body settling with a creak of old joints. "The answer is complicated, but the simple version is this. We did not understand humans until it was too late. And by the time we understood them, we had no choice but to keep fighting." He explained that the hegemony had conquered dozens of species over thousands of years. They had developed a system, a formula for victory. First, you demonstrated overwhelming force. Then you offered reasonable terms of surrender. Most species accepted defeat when the odds were clearly against them. It was logical. It was sensible. "But humans are not logical," Oran said. "They are not sensible. They do not calculate odds the way we do. When we showed them our power, they did not see a reason to surrender. They saw a challenge." He described the reports that had come from the scientists who studied alien species. They had examined human biology and psychology, trying to understand why this species was so different. "The scientists discovered something terrifying," Oran said. "Humans evolved as persistence predators. Do you know what that means?" Shook her head. On their home world, humans were not the strongest animals. They were not the fastest. They had no claws, no armor, no venom. But they had one advantage that no other creature could match. They could keep going longer than anything else. He explained the concept slowly, making sure understood. On Earth, humans had hunted by chasing their prey for hours, sometimes days. They would follow an animal until it collapsed from exhaustion. The prey would run faster, but the humans would keep walking, keep following, never stopping, never giving up. Eventually, the prey would simply fall down and die, too tired to move anymore. This is built into their bodies, Oran said. Their legs are designed for long-distance movement. Their cooling system, this strange thing called sweating, allows them to keep moving when other creatures would overheat. They can function without sleep for days. They can keep moving while injured. They can push through pain that would stop any other species. He leaned forward, his eyes intense. But the truly terrifying part is their minds. Human psychology evolved to match their bodies. They do not know how to give up. Surrender is not natural to them. When they are losing, they do not think about accepting defeat. They think about how to keep fighting. Was beginning to understand, so when we attacked them, we triggered something ancient in their brains, Aran finished. Something that had been built over millions of years of evolution. We became the prey that needed to be chased, and humans never stopped chasing. He told her about a moment that had stayed with him for 40 years. It was on a frozen world called III during the middle years of the war. Oran had been leading a patrol when they discovered a wounded human soldier. He was badly hurt, Oran said. His leg was shattered. He had no supplies, no weapons, no way to communicate with his people. The temperature was far below freezing. Any sane creature would have laid down and accepted death. What did he do? Asked. He ran, or rather he crawled. We tracked him across 17 kilometers of frozen wasteland. 17 kilometers with a broken leg in deadly cold. He crawled through snow and ice, dragging himself forward meter by meter. Oran's voice was filled with something that sounded almost like respect. We followed him thinking he would stop soon. He did not stop. When his arms gave out, he pulled himself forward with his fingers. When his fingers were destroyed by the cold, he kept pushing with his elbows. He never stopped, not for one moment. Did you catch him? Asked. Yes. After 3 days, he could not move anymore. But even then, he was not finished. He had been carrying an intelligence drive, a device with important military information. When he realized we were going to capture him, he destroyed it, crushed it with a rock, even though the movement cost him the last of his strength. Oran was quiet for a moment. His last words were in a language I did not understand, but one of our translators told me later what he said. He said, "Tell my daughter I never stopped trying." The old warrior looked at, with something like wonder in his ancient eyes. He was dying, frozen, broken, alone, and his final thought was not about his own suffering. It was about making sure his daughter knew he had never given up. He shook his head slowly. How do you defeat an enemy like that? You cannot break their bodies because they keep fighting through injuries that would kill anyone else. You cannot break their spirits because giving up is simply not something they know how to do. He explained what the hegemony's commanders had eventually called this phenomenon. They named it aura, a word that translated roughly as the drowning. Fighting humans was like being dragged underwater, Oran said. They pulled you down and they never let go. It did not matter how strong you were, how well you could swim. They would keep pulling, keep dragging until you both drowned together, and they were perfectly willing to die as long as they took you with them. Was silent, processing everything she had heard. There is something else, Oran continued. Something that made humans even more dangerous as the war continued. What? Asked. Memory. Humans never forget. When we killed their families, they remembered. When we destroyed their worlds, they remembered. They passed these memories to their children, and their children passed them on as well. Every atrocity we committed became part of their collective story. He described how, as the war dragged on, human children were raised on stories of cruelty. They grew up hating the hegemony. They volunteered for military service as soon as they were old enough. They trained harder than their parents had, driven by a desire for revenge that had been planted in them from birth. We were not just fighting the humans who were alive when the war started, Oran said. We were fighting every human who would ever live. The war was becoming a permanent state of existence for them. Their entire culture was being rebuilt around the goal of destroying us. He finished his drink and set the glass down with a heavy thud. And then, in the 20th year of the war, something happened that changed everything. What? Asked, leaning forward. Human scouts discovered the location of Prime, our home world, the place where our families lived, where our children played, where everything we loved existed. His voice dropped to a whisper. For 20 years we had been attacking them, invading their worlds, killing their people. Now, for the first time, they could attack us, and we had given them 20 years of reasons to want us all dead. He looked at and she saw fear in his eyes. Real fear, the kind that never truly fades. Do you understand now why I still wake up at night, 40 years later, covered in sweat? Because I remember what we created. We took a peaceful species and turned them into the most dangerous enemy in the galaxy. We taught them to hate. We taught them to fight. We made them into perfect killing machines fueled by rage and grief. He gestured at the peaceful city beyond the windows. And every day, I thank whatever gods may exist that they chose mercy instead of vengeance, because if they had decided to finish what we started, none of us would be here today. The memorial hall was nearly empty now. The other veterans had gone home to their families, their nightmares, their memories. Only Oran and remained, sitting in the dim light of the dying lamps. One final question, said softly, the most important one. I know what you are going to ask, Oran replied. You want to know how the war ended, why we made peace after 22 years of fighting. Yes, the history books say there was a treaty. They say both sides agreed to stop, but they do not explain why. After everything that happened, after all the death and hatred, why did the humans agree to peace? Oran was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with emotion. In the 22nd year of the war, a human fleet appeared in space, not to attack, not to fight. They came to deliver a message. He described the scene. The hegemony's defense forces had scrambled to meet the human ships, expecting a battle. Instead, the humans had simply stopped at the edge of weapon range and sent a transmission requesting a meeting. Our commanders were confused, Oran said. For 22 years, humans had fought without talking. No negotiations, no diplomacy, just endless, grinding war. Why would they want to talk now? The answer became clear when the human ambassador arrived. She was a small woman with hair and a face lined with age. Oran had studied human aging by then, and he realized with shock that she was old. Very old. She had to be in her 70s or 80s. Do you understand what that means? He asked. She had been an adult when the war started. She had lived through the entire conflict, every battle, every loss, every terrible moment, and she was still alive, still fighting. The ambassador's name was. She had lost her husband in the first year of the war, her son in the 10th, and her daughter in the 20th. Her entire family had been killed by forces. By every measure, she should have been the last person to ask for peace. She stood before the Hegemony Council, this tiny old woman surrounded by towering warriors, and she spoke without fear. She told us that the war could continue, Oran said. Humanity had built new ships. They had trained new soldiers. They had developed new weapons. Their children had been raised on stories of our cruelty, and they were eager to fight. He paused, remembering her words. She said that humanity could keep fighting for another century if necessary. They would never surrender. They would never give up. They would keep coming until one of our species was completely destroyed. Felt a chill run down her spine. That sounds like a threat. It was, but it was also an offer. Oran explained that the ambassador had then changed her tone. She had spoken about the cost of the war on both sides. The millions dead. The worlds burned. The children who had grown up knowing nothing but violence. She had spoken about what the future would look like if the fighting continued. Endless death, endless hatred, until nothing was left but ashes and bones. And then she asked us a question, Oran said. A simple question that cut through everything. "What was it?" asked. She asked, "Do you want your to meet ours, or do you want to keep fighting until one of our species no longer exists?" The council chamber had been silent. For the first time in 22 years, the leaders of the hegemony were forced to truly consider what they were doing. Not just the battles and strategies, but the long-term future of their entire species. "Our intelligence officers presented their reports," Oran continued. "They showed us the human fleet, smaller than ours but crewed by soldiers who had been training their entire lives for this fight. They showed us the human colonies, where children were being taught to hate us from birth. They showed us projections of what the next 20 years would look like." He shook his head slowly. The projections were terrifying. The humans were getting stronger. Their technology was improving. Their numbers were growing despite everything we had done to reduce them. And our people were getting tired. We had been fighting for so long. Our economy was struggling. Our young people did not want to die in a war that seemed to have no end. The council had debated for 3 days. Some wanted to continue fighting. Some argued that they could still win if they committed all their resources. But in the end, the majority voted for peace. "We were not beaten," Oran said. "Not in the traditional sense. We still had more ships, more soldiers, more resources, but we were exhausted. And we finally understood something that we should have learned in the beginning." "What?" asked. "We understood that some wars cannot be won, not because the enemy is stronger, but because they simply will not stop. You can kill them by the millions and they will keep coming. You can destroy their worlds and they will build new ones. You can take everything from them and they will fight with their bare hands." He looked at the memorial wall one final time. "The humans taught us that victory is not always about who is stronger. Sometimes it is about who is more willing to sacrifice. And no species in the galaxy is more willing to sacrifice than humans." The peace treaty was signed 6 months later. The terms were harsh for the hegemony. They paid reparations to the human colonies they had destroyed. They returned all occupied worlds. They handed over war criminals to be tried by human courts. But the fighting stopped, the dying ended, and slowly over decades the two species began to heal. "Ambassador visited Prime 5 years after the treaty," Oran said. "I was there. I watched her walk through our capital city, this old woman who had lost everything to our war. People stared at her with fear and hatred." "What did she do?" asked. "She visited a memorial for our fallen soldiers. She stood there for an hour, reading the names of the we had lost, and then she placed a human flower at the base of the memorial." Oran's voice cracked slightly. When reporters asked her why, she said something I will never forget. She said, "They were soldiers. They followed orders. They loved their families and their world. We killed them and they killed us, and none of us really understood why. The least I can do is honor their memory, even though they were my enemies." He was quiet for a moment, composing himself. "That was when I truly understood humans. They are capable of terrible violence. They can hate with a passion that burns like a star, but they are also capable of forgiveness, of mercy, of choosing peace when revenge would be so much easier." Looked at her notes, filled with pages of horror and death and suffering. "Why do you think they chose peace, after everything we did to them?" Oran considered the question carefully. "I think they chose peace because they were tired too. Because they looked at their children and did not want to raise another generation of warriors. Because they understood that hatred, even justified hatred, eventually destroys the one who carries it." He stood slowly, his old body protesting the movement. "The humans have a saying, never start a fight with someone who has nothing left to lose. We took their worlds. We killed their families. We made them into a species with nothing left to lose." He gestured at the city beyond the windows, children playing in parks, human tourists walking the streets, the two species mingling without fear, their old hatreds fading with each new generation. We are very lucky that they chose to find something new worth living for. Because if they had not, if they had decided that revenge was more important than peace, they would have followed us to the ends of the galaxy. They would have hunted us across the stars. They would have kept fighting until every last was dead, even if it meant dying themselves. He looked at one final time, his ancient eyes filled with a wisdom bought with decades of pain. That is the truth about humans, young one. They are the most dangerous species in the galaxy, not because of their strength or their technology, but because of their hearts. They love fiercely, hate deeply, and never, ever give up. He moved toward the door, then paused. Write your history. Tell the young ones what we did and what we learned, and make sure they understand the most important lesson of all. What lesson is that? Asked. Oran smiled, a strange expression on his face. Never make an enemy of humanity, because they will remember, they will endure, and they will never stop fighting for the people they love. He walked out into the night, leaving alone with her notes and her thoughts. Outside, the moon shone down on a city at peace, where two species who had once tried to destroy each other now lived side by side. It was not a perfect peace. Old wounds still ached, old hatred still flickered in dark corners, but it was peace nonetheless. And somewhere in the stars, on 100 human worlds, children were growing up without learning to hate. They would never know what their grandparents had suffered. They would never understand why the old veterans sometimes woke up screaming. They would only know that the war was over, and that somehow, against all odds, both species had found a way to survive. That, perhaps, was the most human thing of all.